Hello, everybody out there in Cyberland. My name is Todd Coolman, and I'm a jazz bassist. I guess you can see that on the screen. I've got a podcast, and I've been in education for a lot of years also. And I just want to start by thanking Gail Boyd for this opportunity to come to you on alternatives venues for jazz. It's a great show that I enjoy checking out myself. Um, Gail was nice enough to present me with the various questions that I could use as launching points. So one of the first ones is, how did you get into jazz? How did I get into it? I think basically when I was in high school, I was playing the double bass by the time I was about 15 or 16, I think. And in those days, we just had a school orchestra. We didn't really have any kind of a jazz anything at the school where I was going. Um, but I was at an orchestra rehearsal. I played in a sort of a civic orchestra in the town where I lived, and I heard a piano player playing some unusual music, at least unusual to my ear. Turned out he was the son of the guy that was in my bass section with me, and his son was into playing jazz. So I met him, and I was told him I was interested in the music he was playing, and kind of sketched out a couple things for me, and so whenever I went to the orchestra rehearsal, I'd go a little early or stay a little late and, like, jam with him. I had no idea what I was doing, but that's kinda how my interest started, and he introduced me to some, high school music directors in other high schools in my district who took an interest in me, I guess, and, they mentored me, and the most important thing, really, they would invite me to their homes to jam with them. Again, I didn't know anything I was doing, but they were willing to just let me uh, play what I heard, try to understand things. They would give me little pointers about, uh, you know, how to function in a group and how these tunes were put together. And, they played slow tempo so I could keep up. And, they just really kind of shepherded me along toward getting a little more familiar with playing jazz. And then here, the turning point was amazing. Um, in those days, well, these gentlemen were probably in their late 20s by then. They were music teachers. And perhaps by coincidence, the two or three of them that were kind of mentoring me were they happened to have been African American guys. And so in those days, they asked me if I would like to go over to Chicago. I'm originally from Gary, Indiana, so Chicago is just a little ways away. They wanted to know if I wanted to go to a jazz club and hear live jazz, and of course I did. So they got together and came to my house to ask my parents permission to take me to hear a Sunday matinee. The matinees, they always had a matinee on Sunday, and they didn't serve alcohol, so minors could go, young people. And my parents said, "Well, oh, you can take them, but you got to have them home by a certain time, and here's our number if anything happens," and blah blah blah. So they took me to the jazz showcase in Chicago, and the first jazz musician I ever heard was Dizzy Gillespie. First live jazz. In fact, Roy Haynes was the drummer, I recall. Um, so I had no idea what that was. All I knew was it felt great. It just felt wonderful. And I also remember thinking that it was the first time in my life I had ever seen grown men having fun working, because Gary, Indiana was a steel town, and all of the men pretty much worked in the steel mill and didn't like their jobs, were very angry about having to work in the mill and so forth and so on. So I didn't know what to think of it. I just came home. I thought it felt great. So they offered to take me the second week. So I went the second week and I heard the Bill Evans trio right after hearing Dizzy the next week. Eddie Gomez on bass and Marty Morell on drums. And I went back a third week and I heard Ornette Coleman with Don Cherry, Charlie Hayden, Eddie Blackwell. And man, I just felt like my head was exploding. And we were driving home after that third one, and I said, "I've got a question." They said, "What?" I said, "Which one of those was jazz?" Because they were so different. I thought, well, one must be jazz and the other ones must be something else. And when they explained to me a few more things, I just said, "Man, this is amazing." Whatever this is, this music is transcendental. It's amazing. So I had taken some bass lessons with a local guy, again, one of those mentors. And he brought over a record one day. He brought over an LP, Oscar Peterson Trio. The record was called Night Train. And I put that on after he left. And I listened to that record several hours a day for a week. And I was so captivated by the sound of the bass. And of course, the bass player was Ray Brown. And that sound, I never heard a bass sound like that. It was just all encompassing, just riveting, you know. And so the next week, my teacher came back and we had another lesson. And he said, "Okay, get out exercise number 7 and let's play through that." And I said, "Mr. Fennell," I said, I'm not prepared for my lesson this week." And he got concerned. He said, "Well, are you okay? Is your family all right?" Because I was a pretty good student, actually, usually prepared for my lessons. And I said, "No." I said, "Everybody's fine." He says, "Well, why aren't you prepared?" And I had memorized the notes in the first 12 bars of the 12 bar blues that they played really slow on the record. I think it was da 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 da. Um, C Jam Blues was the name of it, I think. And I had just listened and listened and listened, and I had my bass, and I listened and listened, and I memorized the first 12 measures of what Ray Brown played. And I played that for my teacher. And then he said, "Oh, I see." And my lessons then started to incorporate jazz, not just classical music, which we had been working on. So I guess that's more or less what got me into it. And I've already mentioned the first musicians I heard live. There's a question here. What album did I buy with my own money? What was the first one? Well, that's memorable too. So by the time I had heard all that music and so forth, and then I became aware of records, and I thought, God, maybe I could buy my own record. I had a newspaper route, and I made a few dollars each week profit from the paper route, and I think LPs were about $3.99 or so at that time. And I saved up some money. I thought, okay, I'm going to go buy a jazz record, you know. So when I was in Chicago, I went to a place that was called the Jazz Record Mart. And it was this big joint full of just jazz records. It was like Jazz Disneyland, Jazz Record Disneyland. And I'm leafing through them. I had no idea. I'm looking at all these records. I see all these pictures and names. I didn't know who anybody was. I didn't know what record to buy, and I'm just leafing through them. And I thought, God, how am I going to decide this? And I came upon a record. I think it was on the A&M label. And it had a huge photograph on the cover of Quincy Jones. And he was beautiful. Like the photograph, he was gorgeous. I mean, just physically strikingly handsome. And I thought, wow, so I turned the record over and they had the personnel listed. And it was a big band, so there were a lot of names, none of which I knew, including Quincy Jones. But I looked down, and down at the base it said Ray Brown. I thought, oh man, Ray Brown, he's that guy on Oscar Peterson record with that beautiful sound. This has got to be a good record if he's on it. And so I bought it. Went home and started listening to that. And then I'm looking at the personnel and listening to the solos, and I heard Herbie Hancock. I heard Grady Tate. Freddie Hubbard, I believe, is on it. Jerome Richardson, perhaps. Eric Gale. Um, maybe Snooky Young's on it. I can't recall. And Ray Brown, of course. So by that time, I was really hooked. I mean, I started devoting all of my spending money, whatever I could save from my paper route, went into buying jazz records. But I could only afford to buy one a week, more or less. So that would be my record for the week, and I would listen to it for hours at a time, day after day, and really just try to digest it. So that's kind of how I got into it. I just, I remember thinking when I heard Ray Brown and I heard his playing, I definitely remember thinking, I want to do that. I want to do that. And that was it. I was a goner. I prior to that, I had no idea, no plans for the future. I didn't have any like well, actually that's not true because when I was younger, I thought I would be on the Boston Celtics and play forward on the Boston Celtics. And then early on in my basketball career as a teenager, I learned that I probably was not good enough. So that idea faded. Um, but there's another question here that intrigued me is some advice you've received from an older musician. Who was the musician and what did they tell you? And part of this is kind of fun, and part of it is, well, you'll see. Um, I was lucky enough to be admitted. Well, when I picked a college, I decided I wanted to study music, and I was really thinking I want maybe I could be a musician. Maybe I could do that for a living, like Dizzy Gillespie did, and like Bill Evans and Ornette Coleman did. Like maybe that could be my job. Maybe I wouldn't have to work in the steel mill. Maybe I could just play music and travel and play in clubs and stuff. I thought, wow, well, maybe I better go to a good music school and get some training because I didn't have any of that. And I was lucky enough to get into what's now known as the Jacobs School of Music at Indiana University. Back then, the music school was referred to as the Juilliard of the Midwest, and in many ways it is even today. Uh, anyway, so I go to school, and I'm a freshman, and there's another freshman there, and it's another bass player named John Clayton. I didn't know John Clayton. I'd never heard of him, but seemed like a nice guy. And then I started to learn a little bit about John, that he was from, I think he was from Los Angeles, and he had already been kind of like a professional player out in LA. He was a protege. He had studied with Ray Brown, which I thought, wow, he actually studied with the guy I heard on the record, who I decided I wanted to like play bass because of that. And this guy studied with him. And and he had worked already with like Jimmy Rolls, I think, and Henry Mancini, and done some studio work, and you know uh, worked closely with Ray Brown. And so, needless to say, John sounded fantastic. Like when I heard him, and the very first time I heard him, I was blown away. And so one day I was playing a jam session at the school, and John walked in and just sat down to listen. And I hadn't even hardly known him, and he just sat down and listened. And afterward, this is really cool. He came up to me. He told me I sounded really good. He was so uplifting and supportive. That's what I remember. And he said, "Man, you sound good," and blah blah blah. And he said, "You know something?" He says, "On the blues, like you're playing an F, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Like blues and F on F7, that first chord. He says, when you're walking your bass lines, you might want to pick A's, the note A to go with that chord instead of A flat, for F7. Maybe A is a better choice than A flat. And I said, why? Because I didn't know the difference. Like I didn't have any, I didn't know why that was important. And John said something like, well, he says, oh, listen, he says, do you like barbecue? Barbecue, I said, yeah, man. He said, come on over, man. Why don't you come over to my place? I'll make some barbecue. So we went over there. He's making some barbecue and he starts putting on records. Lo and behold, all the records have Ray Brown on them. And the whole time he's talking to me about what we're hearing. Basically, he's giving me a lesson. And so that was my introduction to jazz education. And so I've never forgotten that. The first advice I got, and he was older than me. So a couple years older than me. I'm told he's 70 now. I'm 67. So he was an older guy who gave me some advice, and that was it. I can remember, this is sort of, I don't know, just something I recall. I was lucky enough to play for a period of time with Ahmad Jamal, the great pianist. And we were playing in a nightclub in New York City, and we were on an intermission, and I don't know, I think some guy at the bar was kind of drunk, and he said a couple things I took issue with, and there was a little difficulty, but it got ironed out. I went back to the dressing room, and Ahmad was there, and I said, hey, in case you hear of a little problem, it's resolved, but there was a kind of a drunk guy. I kind of took exception with a couple things he had to say, and I probably should have just kept my mouth shut. And Ahmad looked at me. He says, well, he said, you'll probably notice that on the breaks, I stay in the dressing room. He said, that stuff is for out there. Our music's for the bandstand. And when we're not on the bandstand, we can just, kind of get ready for the next set. So I understood what he meant. I thought that was good advice. Some other advice. I don't know. I've gotten so much advice from so many great players, and really all of it was pretty much helpful. Players usually, especially the great players, they just want the music to be good. So they never came at me with put downs. They always came with like, "Hey man, maybe you should try this or see if you can do that." Uh, I remember Horace Silver, when I was in his band, he said the reason that he wanted me to play the bass parts he had written out instead of just make up some of my own was because he felt that they fit the composition better, and that they were part of the tune that he wrote. And that really taught me, like, as a bassist, my job is to make the music work as best I can and to do whatever's necessary to make the music work. So it's really not about me, like showing anybody anything about the bass or about me. It's more get into the music, figure out what the music needs, play to that, make it work. And that was some of the most valuable advice I've ever gotten from an older musician, because I sort of took that to heart, and I started taking that to the different jobs I was playing. And just as I played, trying to figure out what's needed or what's not needed, and really try to fit into a group, to make a group sound and to make a group work. And so that's, that that advice is worth its weight in gold. Another question came up, how am I coping during the pandemic? Well, let's see. Um, I spent quite a bit of time in college education. I was an instructor in many different colleges. And eventually I found a permanent home at SUNY Purchase College in New York, part of the SUNY State University system. And I worked there full time for about 22 years, and I directed their jazz program for 10 of those years. So I really had made quite a considerable commitment to jazz education all during my career. And I made a decision in 2019, in the summer of 2019, to retire from college teaching. I really, the reason was twofold. One was I felt like, you know, after 40 years of teaching at the college level, I thought, I've offered what I felt I could offer, and maybe it's time to just move over and let some new voices and new points of view come in, take it to the next level. I thought I had done what I could do for that job and that endeavor. So as it worked out, I thought about it for the fall semester during 2019. And in January 2020, I put in my papers to retire. And like a day or two after that, um, we started hearing on the news little rumors about some health problem in China. And then, of course, we came to understand that there was this virus called COVID. And then you all are familiar with the pandemic that ensued and that we're still in. So on about March 8th, I think everything got shut down at the college. That was the last semester I was to teach. I was retiring. So I taught the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 weeks of that semester virtually, right? And I was done. I wasn't even at the school at the end of the semester to say goodbye to anybody, faculty, students, anybody. Just like, boom, we're at home, you know, and that was it. But I'm happy to report that in retirement, what I've been able to do, it's I think it's really great, and I've been blessed to, along with everything else, have good health, which is very important. Can't stress that enough. And now I'm involved in many things that when I was working, really long hours, I was working very diligently at my teaching job, performing actively, frequently, even including being on the road. And I was very, very busy, all during when I was in my 30s, 40s, and 50s. Busy, you know. Um, and all that time, I would say things like, boy, if I only had the time, I'd love to blank. I'd love to this or that. And now that I've retired from college teaching, it's opened up a lot of time for me. And so now I'm endeavoring in a lot of those things that I said I would do if I had the time. And it's a wide variety of things that are not necessarily related, but one aspect that has become very fascinating to me is that one thing is, I don't know, like, well, long story short, I I began being what's called an adult mentor in a youth orchestra, a symphony orchestra. My wife, Darla, who's a bassist also, we're both in this kids orchestra. And we're there to play and to provide a little instruction and guidance, mentoring. And one day my phone rang, and it was the mother of one of the kids in the orchestra asking if I would give her daughter bass lessons, her 9-year-old daughter. Long story short, I said, well, uh, I never have taught kids, but I'm willing to try. And if it doesn't work for you or your daughter, I'll find somebody who's maybe more qualified. Or if it doesn't work for me, I'll just have to find someone more qualified and refer you on. So we made that agreement. Long story short, now I've got a studio, a private studio of about 5 young students aged about 11 to 16 or so. So now I just teach children. It's a gas. I'll just leave it there. It's like a new career for me. Really cool. Some of you may know, and some of you may not, that one of my longest associations in music has been with the great and past James Moody, tremendous tenor player, one of the greatest of all time. And I was in his quartet. I still just pinch myself when I think about it, but I played with him for about 25 years. And he was the most giving, the most generous, most loving, most humble, uh, maybe musician that I've ever known. Um, in our music business, we play with these different people, and we go to gigs and finish a project, maybe work a week at a club, maybe a 3-week tour in Europe, and at the end, it's like, all right, well, that was a lot of fun. Say hello to the missus, take it easy. See you next time. And you don't necessarily form deep personal relationships. You more or less professional relationships. You know, some of them extend into the personal, to some degree, but everybody's so busy. But Moody really took me under his wing, and we developed a very deep and close relationship. Um, and that extended also to his lovely wife, Linda, who both of them were and are uh, close to my heart. Um, and I could go on and on about that relationship, but it would take years to discuss it. I miss him terribly, but the things I learned from him, both musical, both personal, and about the world, um, I learned from him by example. He never told me anything, but he told me everything. He showed me everything. And when I grow up, I'd like to be like him. I miss him a great deal. And people who know him absolutely know what I'm talking about. And I was just very fortunate. Music aside, I was fortunate to have someone like that in my life. I often reflect upon the memories I have of all of the stuff we did together. And especially when I'm challenged, sometimes I just sit and think, well, how would Moody act if he were if he were in this situation? What would he do about it? I'm still learning from him. He's still showing me, and that won't end. I'm not trying to suggest that I'm not close with other musicians. I am, but that was just one of those special relationships. It's probably once in a lifetime, whether it happens to be a work colleague or you know. But I'd like to close just with a little advice to aspiring musicians, particularly young ones. And I would just say, let's follow the advice of Shakespeare. He said, "To thine own self be true." And I would extend that and say, "To the music be true." Just remember that the music is the most important thing. It supersedes everything. It supersedes who you are, who anybody is, who you say, uh, who says anything about you, good or bad, whatever happens, good or bad. The music is more important than any of it. So just be true to yourself and true to the music. And I believe that, let's put it this way. If you do that, I believe it optimizes and gives you the very best chance to succeed at your goals. I'm not saying that everyone succeeds at everything, but if you have that mindset, that is the best kind of guarantee that you have a chance. And I've learned that from all of my elders. So I'm passing it on to you. Okay. I think I can leave it there, um, because that's just a good place for everyone to be. Be true to the music. Be true to yourself. That goes for anybody. I'd like to thank Gail Boyd again for this opportunity. And the alternative venues for jazz is a great, great resource. So I'll be checking it out regularly. And I hope that you do too, because there's a lot of great things on here that really have enriched me already. So I'm going to keep coming. Thanks.